Hey douchebags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and today I'll be reviewing the sophomore album from the Swedish DJ and producer worldwide phenomenon Eric Prydz. This one's called Opus. Now some people may tend to argue if this is indeed his sophomore or if this is his debut album, because he did release an album in 2012 called Eric Prydz Presents Pryda, but it was under the alias Pryda, which is just him once again. So technically, therefore, this is his first album fully as just Eric Prydz under that alias. For the sake of all the fans who are going to hate me if I call this his debut album, I'm going to call this his sophomore record. Now going back to the Pryda album, you can tell Eric Prydz is a complete innovator when it came to dance music. In fact, that's the era where on the deluxe version we got Miami to Atlanta, which is the origin of the infamous Pryda snare, which has been used in nearly every big room song since then. Most notably tracks like In My Mind Axwell Remix, which heavily uses it, and Animals by Martin Garrix, along with basically every other track on Spinnin' Records in 2013-2014. He really is truly one of the pioneers, coming out with hits like Call on Me, which is probably one of my favorite jams by him, along with Piano. Of course, I do like tracks such as Miami to Atlanta as well. That's one of my favorites by him, regardless of how much I hear that freaking Pryda snare. Also, jams like Align are really awesome to get down to. He's always just been kind of building this really awesome house sound, and honestly, one of my favorite years for house music was around this 2011-2012 era, where everything's just very, very piano-centered, melodic and just dancey and just uplifting and euphoric. That's the era of house music I'm in love with. So with this upcoming album, I really set my expectations high for Eric. However, this album did not lead up to expectations, and for the most part I'm just going to kind of summarize the first half of this record. I got a little bit more to talk about in the second half. For convenience sake, this album is primarily just classic progressive house, and honestly, if I want to get my disappointed, I guess you could say, opinions out right now, this album seems like a step backwards. With Eric Prydz being such an innovator in progressive house music, I feel like this thing was actually a few years behind where the Pryda album was, honestly. That one was really innovating the house scene, and with tracks like Miami to Atlanta really building a future ground for dance music. I think this thing is definitely a step backwards, and although you can hear like clearly his production has gotten better, it's a lot less muffled, but honestly, if you take a more classic sound and refine it with better production, cleaner production for that matter, I don't think that's making anything any better. I'd much rather hear a muffled yet innovative, less clean production. Now, we do get some awesome features on this album, such as Rob Swire actually didn't love Breathe. Rob's vocal appearance is really nice in this and definitely hypes me up for the return of Pendulum in just a couple months. But honestly, most of this thing is your standard classic progressive house, and I would have even preferred to hear some of that 2008, 2009, 2011 to 2012 house sound, that very, like I said, piano-based stuff. Now, on the first half of this album, we're getting a lot of just clean progressions through the entire thing, just really long build-ups. Some of these are incredibly cool, actually. There are a couple really cool piano lines on this in the first half. I think on Collider it could have been Black Dice, I could be wrong about that. One of those two tracks. And there were some live drums, I could tell, in a lot of cases. Breathe definitely isn't one of my least favorites, like I said, fairly enjoyable. But following that is when we really get digging into the awesome parts of this album. Not meaning to throw away the first half completely, because like I said, there are some good parts about it. But I think the second half is really where we start getting into the little more innovative and enjoyable stuff, which is really disappointing. Honestly, just gonna throw, I'm so scattered with this review, but Opus, the closer for this album, I think could have made an amazing intro. It's got this really long progression, and honestly, one of the most beautiful progressive house tracks I've heard in the last few years. Really love that one, even though you can kind of throw it away for just being the 9-minute long track. Really takes some time to listen to this one. It's super enjoyable. One of my favorites on this one was one of the singles released last year called Generate. Luckily, we got the full mix of this track instead of the radio edit. A couple of my other favorites are scattered out through the end here. The Matrix is really cool, and disappointingly, Every Day is also one of my least favorites, which is technically the first single off this album. This one released 4 freaking years ago, right after the Pryda album, which is probably why I like it so much, because it relates to a sound so closely musically to that album. Takes me back to the good days when I was just starting to get into dance music, and it's really euphoric for me, especially because it doesn't have that same clean sound that most of this album seems to have. It's so freaking good. Oddity is also a really cool one. The rescored version of Mia is also a fairly good one. And these ones just have, in my opinion, a lot better melodies, a lot smoother production, just more enjoyable, totally. Especially Generate and Opus. About innovation, like I was talking about at the beginning of the thing, I think really there's two tracks on this album that are innovative in my opinion. That's Generate and Opus. Like I said, Opus takes that sound, that more refined progressive house sound that Eric Prydz seems to be working on for the entire album, take that, translate it into a modern day setting, and ends up sounding really good. This could fit into classics like deadmau5's Strobe, or like Alesso's remix of Pressure, just the classics of house music, this modern progressive house scene. This one's definitely up there. Generate, on the other hand, has a little bit more of a pop feel. It's got some triplet kicks at some points, which sound really cool. The vocals on this one are also really catchy, and ever since the first time I heard this, it's been on repeat for me. And even though it's a long track, it never loses its flavor. Honestly, a huge track for this album, definitely a mood raiser. Honestly, like I said, I really do appreciate Eric's production ability. I do appreciate his ability to push out a 19-track album, but as a music critic, I can't absolutely love this one. There's just so much, I don't want to say boring in a meaning of a bad way, I just mean like there's so much, not just the repetition factor, because we are getting a lot of that on Opus, which is one of my favorite tracks, just the fact that we're getting progressive house track after progressive house track after progressive house track, and it doesn't seem to be too much innovation. I'd love to see something a little more diverse. Like I said, last 10 tracks or so of this album would have made an awesome record, opening with Opus. Not meaning to throw away this album completely, it is a good attempt, but I think Eric, as a producer, could have done a lot more, especially with his past innovations. And being the first full album as Eric Prydz, I had a lot higher expectations for this thing. I was tossing around a few different ratings. I think the most fair I can give this one is a 5.5. Before you get super ticked at me, the average reviewer or the average critic right now is giving it about a 6. So I'm not too far off, and being a progressive house fan, this one was fairly disappointing in that particular genre. I was really looking forward to hearing this one, ended up being fairly disappointed, especially because a lot of my friends were really hyping up this album to be a progressive house masterpiece, which I really don't think it was. Overall, this one's a solid attempt, but not nearly as innovative or monumental as I think Eric Prydz could have done. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think in the comments, and especially let me know any albums you want me to review in the near future. Because the comment section is definitely the place to do that. I'm constantly checking to make sure, go through the different things. There's not a lot coming out in March, it seems like, as of now, other than Karma Fields and a couple others that I'm pretty excited for. And anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this review. I'll catch you guys later. Peace.